So let's now switch to the second season of the Foundation series on Apple TV Plus. I don't think they played any Beatles music in that series. And in case anybody's wondering why
the Beatles were in Doctor Who, by the way.
Oh, you're right. That's right.
Yeah, they were in Doctor Who, and they made the joke back then that some young woman from the future said she hates classical music, which was a really funny joke in 1964 or 5 or whatever it aired. And it aired, and nowadays, of course, so even back then, they knew the Beatles were going to last forever.
Yeah, that's a good point. But actually, on this subject, I think I can't remember. I have a vague recollection. Maybe one of the two of you remembers. Didn't they, in one of the episodes of the second season of Foundation, play some current song, or am I confusing that with something else?
Oh, I think you must be confusing it with something else. You're not thinking of the Orville.
Okay.
I mean,
no, Foundation didn't. I think it was must have been something else. Foundation only had this instrumental score by Bear McCreary.
Yeah, no, I know the Orville, of course, but no, it was Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, that at some point they had like a musical. It was like a slight.
Yes,
I never saw the
one.
musical one.
Yeah,
I still have not watched the musical one. I've just been afraid to.
Well, look, I'll tell you, we'll keep this in the Foundation part of our conversation.
The Foundation musical. No, that would be something to see.
The musical episode on Star Trek Strange New World was idiotic, to say the least, but it did have some redeeming elements. I mean, it's an interesting story, and you should at least watch it.
Okay. All right.
All right. But let's get back to Foundation. Now, for those of you who saw or heard the conversation that the three of us had literally about 2 years ago, in November 2021, after we saw the first season of the Foundation series. I hope you'll be happy to see and hear us again. And one of the things I'm interested in is to what extent our opinions have changed or stayed the same. So let me start this off by, and then each of you could give your brief summary, and then we'll get into more specific things. I after all is said and done, and thinking about this over the last couple of months, although I enjoyed the second season more than the first season, I have the same complaints about the second season as I had about the first season. And in particular, the more I think about it, is it's a great story, but why call someone by a certain name? And it's the name of a character in Asimov's written Foundation trilogy and Foundation series. So, the great general Bel Riosi, why have a character of that name if he has so little in common with the written character that we've come to know with that name? And that is, I think, an important problem, and people are having different reactions to it. Obviously, the reason why David Goyer and his staff made the decision to use the name is he was hoping it would resonate with viewers who read the novels. And it does, but it still continues to annoy me when he turns into a different character. Now, just to be clear, I don't object to or mind at all the fact that he is a gay character, and that wasn't discussed one way or another in the written version.
He could have been in the books too, for all we know.
That's
I'm more a little troubled that the one character who is probably gay, very likely gay, and hinted to be gay, is not gay in the show.
Yeah, let's
Harvey Mello.
Yeah, Harvey Mello, who likes God. I mean, he's probably bisexual because it's never mentioned at all. But he's shown in a sort of relationship with a woman in the show.
Yes,
And he's the one character who's not white described to be not white. The others might well be not white either, and he's white, and he's played by a Cypriot British actor who's white. So that's kind of weird.
that's right. But so as an overall, summary, I once again enjoyed immensely the Cleonic clone part. I still think it is great science fiction, just a story of clones who are emperors and everything associated with that. I was probably less annoyed, with his android assistant, lover, protector, whatever you want to call her. Obviously, there are differences between her and the character in the written novels. And again, I don't mind at all the gender change, but that was the least annoying to me. But the other characters, to the extent that we knew anything about them, it continues to bother me that here are the names. Here's what we expect, understandably, to see and hear of them. And that is over and over again not done in the television series. So what are your views on that?
I'll go next if you don't mind, because I have some immediate refutations. No, I would. I first want to talk about the differences between the first and the second season from my perspective. And I know that part of this is internal and part of this was actually in the show. In the first season, my experience of watching it was stressful. I was constantly, I really wanted it to work. I really wanted it to be successful. And that was coloring the way I watched it. I wanted the show to really bring out all the magic from the books that I'd read, and I really wanted people to understand the brilliance of Asimov, right? And in seeing it the first season, I was constantly like working from that perspective, and it was stressful. I was like feeling like I wanted to defend what I liked about the show and push back on all the people who were criticizing it reflexively and saying it was just an insult to Asimov, blah, 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 and all that. And I remember feeling this constant, like, just tension watching it throughout the whole thing until the last couple episodes when I finally kind of just, I think it was Roxanne Dawson, the director of the 8th and 9th episodes, and then Goyer directed the last in the first season. And Roxanne Dawson's 8th and 9th episodes were so brilliantly directed that it just, like, I just got sucked into it, and I really enjoyed
great
watching
science fiction
those
director.
parts.
And of course, I have Klingon from Star Trek.
But what I realized afterwards, thinking back on the season, is how I kind of realized how much I had ruined it for myself by having that tension. And so I just said, what can I do about the second season? I'm just going to forget about the books. Just forget about the books and watch the show and enjoy the show as it is, and think of it as a completely different thing. So that was the approach I took to the second season, and immediately I lost that tension. It was just fun. It was fun from beginning to end. I really enjoyed watching it. Now, to get to Paul's point about the name dropping and the wrong names for characters, my take on that is when a name was dropped, like Limar Panyets, Limar Panyets is one of my favorite obscure characters in Foundation. He's just a one-off, and who knows who Limar Panyets is? And there's Limar Panyets, and it's like I jump up and say, I know who Limar Panyets is when I hear that name, right? Because I'm such a Foundation geek. But so there was a kind of a thrill to that, and then my next thought is, wait a second, this is supposed to be the Grandmaster of Ascon says that in the books, and this is this is Asperargo of Corel saying it on the show. Wait, what's going on? Wait, this isn't even Limar Panyets, this is Hober Mallow. And then yeah, they never mentioned Lathan Devers, which kind of upset me because he was another one of those, I mean, even more important character than Limar Panyets, obviously. But when I'd hear those names, what I'm getting at is it did have that resonance, but then I was able to kind of roll off it and not worry about it. And see it as you know, a new character with a familiar name. But more than anybody, this applies for me to Hober Mallow, because I thought that the character in the show was absolutely not the Hober Mallow character from the books. He was more of Limar Panyets and Lathan Devers rolled into one. And you know, then another one was Dusan because I loved that character in the books. I loved his dialogue, and I loved his interplay with Belriose, and the conversations that they had about the great man theory of history and the bottom up theory, you know, of social determinism, which one would prevail. And I thought it was just that was the most brilliant theme building of that concept in the books, and was completely missing from the show. And even though I really liked the actor they chose for Dusan Bar, and I actually thought he resembled a lot the character of Onam Bar in The Merchant Princes. I thought he was a great character. I hated that they killed him off right away. Because he's supposed to have, I mean, it's okay for
I was
Onam
actually
Bar.
screaming at the screen, you can't kill him, we still need him.
Yeah, if he was Onam Bar, then it would be okay to kill him off, even though that's the opposite of what happened in the books, because I remember that really touching scene where Hober Mallow secretly goes back and leaves a cache of goodies for Onam Bar, and when he leaves his after that brief visit with him. And instead he kills him in this one, but it's Dusan Bar. And so, you know, there's a lot of that amalgamation of characters and calling out names just for name's sake, just to be, you know, because this is supposed to be based on Asimov's Foundation. That's a little annoying, but it's also kind of fun at the same time. And I can kind of let those equal each other out and just enjoy the series that they are creating. And the other big change, the other big difference from season 1 to season 2, I don't think had anything to do with me and my perception of it. It was that it just was better done. The whole second season had better production values, better pacing, better. I thought it had better balance between all the different storylines. The first one was clearly dominated by that Cleonic Dynasty storyline, which was incredible. And I thought that the Foundation side of things really kind of suffered in comparison. In the second season, I found, like right from the start in the first episode, that the switches between Hari Seldon in the Knife and the Prime Radiant, and the fight scenes and the sex scenes with Demerzel and all the Empire, the Trantor stuff, and then the things happening between Gail Salvor and the other Hari. I really liked how they went just from one to the next to the next to the next, and came back. It kind of had a rotation between these that just felt so much more smooth, and like really like one story, one big story with a lot of facets. And I felt like it maintained that through most of the season. There was always they were always touching all the different parts of the story pretty equally, and there wasn't that imbalance. So to me, that's the part of the show that I thought was really well done, and made a big difference between parts the seasons 1 and 2. I'll
Okay,
let you speak.
before we get to Cora, let me just say I agree completely that it was better produced and overall more enjoyable. But for me, that discord that you were able to put aside, the very fact that the names have a resonance disabled my ability to put it aside. So, that could just be a question of personality, and, whether or not that works might be due to the viewer.
Well, another thing is that we're seeing this from book readers' perspective, and we're not the main target audience of this show, in that Goyer knew that to make it successful, he had to entertain not just Asimov readers, but people who had never read Asimov, right? And I think that's the much larger demographic that he had to be entertained, right? And if you think about it from the perspective of those who haven't read the books, they don't care about that. Right. They don't care about the names of the characters. They just care about that it's self-consistent, right? So I think that was a trade-off, and he knew he was going to piss off some of us.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, but I would also say the only reason that he or anyone got to make this series was because of the recognition that the original trilogy and the series that ensued received. And, otherwise, if it had just been another, there are really very few science fiction novels like that. Dune is the only one actually that comes to mind. I'm sure a lot of people will be furious that I even say that, because they can think of something other than the Foundation series and the Dune series. But I do think those two are the titans of science fiction series. And therefore, it's not surprising that both of them have had the reincarnation into, in one case, Dune, several movies, and in the case of Foundation, into this television series. But let's go to Cora.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle of both of you, because when I heard our Foundation starting off again, and it was at a time when it was stressful for me because I've had a lot of personal stress. It's like, oh God, not that again and again, and it's probably just going to make me angry. But my teenage self would never forgive me if I didn't at least watch it, because I also enjoyed the second season more than the first one, and it was generally better made. It also it had a few different, Jane Espenson, who worked a lot with the Joss Whedon shows and was one of the main writers in the second season, and she's a very good writer, which is also why I'm so, because it's obvious that the people who work on this, Josh Friedman, David Goyer, Jane Espenson, Eric Carrasco, those people are very, very good writers. And they obviously have read Foundation. You know that they've read it. Also, otherwise they wouldn't know who Limmer Ponyitz is, or Aspargo, and so on. And the frustrating thing again is, as a show, it's good, it's fun. A lot of the plot lines were great. And also the actors they've got a ridiculously good cast, even in tiny roles. For example, the guy who plays Aspargo, Philip Glenister, is a British actor. If you've seen the British original Life on Mars and its sequel Ashes to Ashes, he was a police officer. He's a fabulous actor, and that's someone who's way too good for such a tiny role. And even though he's a wonderful Aspar, the people who they got, the guy who plays Hober Mallow, Dimitri Leonidas, that guy is not Hober Mallow from the books, and he doesn't look like Hober Mallow, but he's fabulous in the role. The Demoiselle, Zell, Laura Byrne, a Finnish actress, I never heard of her before, but she's wonderful, and I actually want to see the Elijah Bailey and Daniel Oliver stories done with Laura Byrne and someone to do Elijah, even if she has got the wrong gender. She's wonderful, and of course, Jared Harris is amazing as Harry Seldon. Lee Pace is, well, first of all, we get to see a lot of him, and that's great. And he's a real fan. Lee Pace is a geek like us, as he's read the books, and he's great. He's great as the Brother Day, the Middle Cleon, whichever one it is. Also, the guy who plays Brother Dusk, Terrence Mann, I think is the name. In short, the cast is the person who plays Polyverisov. He's wonderful. He's not the Polyverisov from Butte, so the cast is wonderful. Cool. The story is a lot of fun. It's well done, but again, it's like, this is good, but it's not Foundation. Maybe they should have just adapted either something of And I understand that they need to make changes. And really, I don't mind that someone is now, that, for example, Salva Halden is now a black woman. I really don't mind. I just wish she were a little more like the Salva we know. Because she's mouth changed. I don't mind that Belrios is gay, especially since his sexuality. I also don't mind that he's about 20 years older than he's supposed to be, which a lot of people seem to have missed, because Belrios is young in the books. He's in his mid-30s. And he's played by an actor in his 50s. But he does a good. They do great jobs. They're good. But I just also I got to see some of my favorite scenes. We even got the gold transmutation scene from the trailers, which I love. Of course, it's not not on its cone, but we got it. We got the Church of the Galactic Spirit, complete with their fake miracles, which I love. Except that the Foundationists are not supposed to believe in that. Okay, Brother Constant might have been an outlier, and Polyversov drank away what brain cells he had a long time ago. Sorry, Poly, but it's correct. But I'm not supposed to really. So on the one hand, it was fun. The actors are great. The production values are wonderful. And on the other hand, it's just not a thing. Okay, why couldn't it have been a little bit more like the Foundation that we know and love? Why couldn't we have it a little? Because the only story which is really, I mean, they did the very first one, the Psychohistorians. That was adapted in the very first episode. That was a decent adaptation. Yes, there was a lot of stuff in there which isn't in the books, and it didn't matter. But they decently adapted the books, and then they totally went off rails. Okay, the second story, the Encyclopedists, or just called Foundation. That one isn't. That one is really, it's very talky and very slow. It would have to be changed a little bit. But everything after that those are solid stories. The Traders and the Merchant Princes are solid stories. They are kind of mysteries in space, but they're solid stories. The Dead Hand is a very good story. And I'm also, of course, I know why they name dropped the mule, but they shouldn't have at least they shouldn't have shown us the mule. The mule reveal is the biggest surprise in the whole damn story, and you don't waste it. You don't waste it on some flash forwards. They could have said, like, oh, there's something scary called the mule. But they should never have shown him to us.
Yeah, well, I just if I could jump in on that, the mule is my favorite. The mule reveal is my favorite part of the whole trilogy.
I think it's everybody's favorite part.
It's just such a great moment, especially if you don't see it coming, and somehow, believe it or not, after 40 years after I read it the first time, I managed to hide from myself the truth and get just as much joy out of reading it the second time. It was like, whoa, Magnifico was the mule. Jeez. That was wonderful.
Let me just say that
edit that out, please. No. But anyway, I was going to say, I have come to accept there is no way they're going to pull that off as well. However the mule is handled and the true identity of the mule, I'm hopeful it's not who we've seen. He's just not the mule. Somebody surprising will turn out to be the mule, but it's not going to be the same way they present it in the books. And one of the things I wanted to point out that I really love about this series, and in a way, it is also one of the things that so many people are annoyed by in this series, that Goyer recognized that one of the things that makes Foundation great and makes Asimov great is subverting of expectations. That you have certain expectations of where things are going, and then they're suddenly thrown upside down again and again, right, by Asimov. And if you take the series as written and you play it out in the same way, anybody who's read the books is not going to have those expectations subverted, right? They're going to see, oh yeah, I know what's coming. Let's see how they do it. Oh, they did it. Okay, great, they did it. But he said he wanted to subvert expectations, not just for people who had not read the books, but for anybody. And the only way you can really do that is to depart significantly from the plot of the books. and in a lot of cases, and I think they've done that, and that's why I think I really enjoy it, because I have been surprised. I have said, whoa, I didn't see that. I didn't see Terminus being blown to bits.
No.
I was not expecting that. And there's that's just one of many things, probably the biggest one. But that to me is an important element of it, of making it as fun as reading Asimov, or close to it. Is you have to have that surprise element throughout, and the twists and turns that you're not expecting. There was something else I wanted to point out, but I was going to say about Lee Pace. I was just reading through the transcript of one of the official podcast things, and Goyer was talking about that scene. I think it's in the third episode, where there's like a state dinner for Queen Sareth and Rue, and they have the three people playing the harps in the background, and they're discussing the politics and everything, right? And Sareth is being very ballsy. I don't know how to. She's saying things that are just like not appropriate, and that is, like Rue says, she's trying to talk herself out of marriage, right? And that there was a thing where they mentioned that Lee Pace saw the dialogue for it, and he was supposed to be really annoyed by her in that scene. He was supposed to like be really put off by her uppityness, right? And he came up with the idea. He said, why don't I just act like I really like it that she's like this? Yeah, why don't I just be cool with it? And that's what they did. They made it so that he was like, no, I think she's appealing with this aspect of her character. And I think that built so much more into his character in that way. And it's purely from Lee Pace, his own dramatic understanding of what would be really an improvement to that.
The three actors who play the Cleons they play different versions of the same person, and because this character, this Brother Day, is not the Brother Day we saw in season 1, and we saw 2 Brother Days in season 1. And the Brother Dusk they're not the same people, and you see that they're not the same people.
And
they're different characters. And of course, talking about subversion of expectations, I totally expected Ceres to die. She's not in the books, so it doesn't matter what. I thought, like, okay, she's so dead. I don't really have to get invested in this woman at all. She's going to die, because if the Cleons don't kill her off, Demoiselle will. But she gets away with it. And even Demoiselle actually lets her and Dawn go with, okay, go away, never bother me again, have your babies. I will just let me run my empire as my programming demands.
And that's a part of Demoiselle's character arc of like, she's changing as well, and like, and back to Lee Pace for a moment, and the idea of the different aspects of the same characters in a previous day, the day from season 1 who ordered the destruction of Thespis and Anacreon, he never would have thought it was fine for Sareth to act that way at a state dinner. He would have had her put to death on the spot, or yelled her to death like he did with that mathematician or whatever, the statistician. That's a great example of where the
first day from season 1, because the second day was a bit more mellow.
Yeah, the second day, the guy he really created a different flavor of that character, and that was a big part of it.
Of course, the most devastating thing is that he thinks the day from season 2 he knows the great man theory of history, and he thinks he's a great man who's going to change everything, and he gets deflated first by Harry Seldon, who says, like, yeah, they're outlaws, but sorry, dude, you're not one of them. And then even worse by Demoiselle, the woman he's in love with, and he has this who's kind of, the relationship is kind of creepy because he's partly sort of his mother or mother figure, but she's also his lover. And the thing is really that Demerzel deflates it with, oh yeah, you're defective. I'm really sorry. I feel responsible for you being defective. I thought having sex with you would change it, but sorry, I can't help you. You are so. He's not the great man of history. He's not the Cleon who's going to change everything. He's part of the plan, just another pawn, and also he's not. The Cleons aren't ruling anything. Demerzel is controlling everything, and yes, this one who thought he was a special Cleon was actually the defective one, which is so, yeah, that's something Asimov would have liked a lot, even if he never wrote it.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that completely. I do want to, though, get back to the mule, and I've said this actually in a couple of interviews on other podcasts about the Foundation television series versus Asimov's original trilogy and the subsequent novels. For me, the epitome of the original trilogy, what made it soar above everything else, and to this day, everything else I've ever read in science fiction, was the 1-2 punch of, on Terminus, you see Belarus and his warships coming. They're on the verge of destroying Terminus, but psychohistory was right. And it turns out at the last minute, Terminus is victorious over this incredibly powerful general. That's the first punch. The second punch is a little later on, however many years later it is, there are a group of people sitting around that same console in Terminus, and the mules ships are approaching, and they're expecting, they call up the hologram of Harry Seldon, and Harry Seldon is babbling on about something going on with the merchants out there. And that's why the mule is such a transcendent character, because he punctured psychohistory. And what bothers me, I mean, we'll see, there is a chance for David Goyer to do that, although I said at the end of the first series, I'll forgive him, first season, I'll forgive him all the divergences if he at least has that or something like that. He can't do that anymore with Belrios, but he might still be able to do something like that with the mule. And so that remains to be seen. By the way, as far as who the mule was, I agree it would be ridiculous if what we saw of the mule is the mule.
Yeah,
right? There is a guy who is wearing what I think of as a sinister hat, like the door post.
He looks like a bad villain from a really bad cyberpunk movie.
Exactly.
And the mule is absolutely, the whole point of the mule is that he doesn't look like you expect the monstrous warlord to look.
He's described as looking like
he's described that way. But remember by whom he is described that way. He's described that way by someone who has every reason to lie, which is, of course,
exactly right.
But it's so wonderfully done. I mean, Asimov was a mystery writer. We all know this, that he was a mystery. And the Foundation stories, and also many of the early robot stories, they are structured a lot like mysteries, because it's about withholding information. And that's also why the mule reveal works so well, and later the second Foundation reveal, when we learn where it is, which is another thing they should never have come up. So it's okay to introduce the metallics, but they shouldn't have come up. We need the reveal for the second Foundation, because we need the shocker that no, it's not, all the other, it's not Tassenda, it's not Terminus itself. We need the shock reveal, because those are the moments which you remember. I still remember where I read the second Foundation reveal, because I was at school, was reading the book, and was sitting there, and I'd just come to the reveal point, and then a boy called Andreas, I can say his full name because it doesn't really matter. Andreas Vegas was his name. He was a classmate, and I think he kind of liked me, and he came up to me and was like, "Cora, what are you reading?" And I was like, "I'm going to strangle you now. Sorry." So it's forever linked to this boy, Andreas Vegas, for me, because so these those also you have to the mule, also Belrios, but particularly the mule, and also those reveals have to be earned. And a lot of the time when you tell people like, oh the first book is a little rough, but then it really takes off, skip to the good part. No, you can't. because you can't
Yeah.
just skip to the good part because it doesn't work if you will never get the impact. Harry Seldon has to be right a couple of times in ever-escalating crises. The first one is aggressive neighbors. The second one is still aggressive neighbors, but they're under control now. Then we get proxy war with the Empire, with the Republic of Coral, and then we get the Empire itself, and finally you need to those reveals need to be earned, and it takes a bit of time. You don't really have to spend that much. Actually, I thought the whole first season would be the first book because they could easily have done it, but they would have had to switch more and switch the actors around more instead of, for some reason, combining basically the Merchant Princes, the Traders, and the Dead Hand, which are three very different stories. You could combine the Merchant Princes and the Traders and combine Hober Mallow and Limmer Ponyard. And Lathan Devers also. This Hober Mallow is three people, and he's also got a lot of DNA of the space, because Hober Mallow is not a space rogue. None of the Traders, I think he's maybe failed space rogue, because the space rogue was already a thing, and because Lee Brackett and C.L. Moore had been writing about such. Yes, the space rogue, the Han Solo, Malcolm Reynolds character was invented by two women. C.L. Moore and Northwest Smith was the first, and then Lee Brackett perfected the archetype. And I think maybe Asimov was trying to write such a character because they were contemporaries. Moore actually was writing earlier than Asimov was, and Brackett was writing at the same time. They were contemporaries. They knew each other, but I think Asimov really wasn't the type to write. So Hober Mallow is a space capitalist, and so to a degree is Limmer Ponyard. And Lathan Devers is the guy who doesn't really get to be a capitalist and really doesn't really get along with the Foundation and has a terrible fate, which yes.
I thought Lathan Devers, this Hober Mallow in the show was much more Lathan Devers than anybody else.
Yeah, he wasn't Hober Mallow at all from the books.
That's
right. I would have liked to see Hober Mallow from. I mean, I love this Hober Mallow. He's a great character. He's wonderfully acted. Also, I loved his relationship with Brother Constant, who's also, he's not in the books at all, but Brother Constant is wonderful. So I love it. Except that I wanted this is one scene I did not. I wanted the naked sunbathing and cigar smoking scene. That's the one I really would have loved to see with, and the character's actually in there. I think it's because you have the Chaim Twer or Chaim Twer and Chaim or whatever he's pronounced, and the other one Lorraine Sutt. They actually are there as the two flunkies of Director Cernak, who's not in the book either. I'm not sure why they couldn't just call him Sutt, but his two flunkies are actually are there. One of them is a woman now. So you have these people there, just like you had Louis Perrin in the first one, but they're just not don't play the roles they're supposed to play.
Yeah, let me just say, as far as the Second Foundation is concerned, that's another. The Second Foundation is in effect a character in and of itself in the trilogy, and so I'm glad Cora brought that up, because I think what Goyer did, there's a consonance of what Goyer is doing between bringing the Mule in and bringing the Second Foundation in. It's almost as if. And I have no idea why Goyer did that, but he was so eager to get the best parts of the Foundation series.
I think he's not sure if he might actually get to tell those stories, because it's an extremely expensive show. Who knows if it's not going to get canceling shows left, right, and center, shows which are successful, shows which are cheaper, and he doesn't know if he actually gets to tell those stories.
That's right. But I think he sort of ruined it to some extent, again, not to keep sounding like such a critic, but the idea that the Second Foundation was located in Trantor, was one of Asimov's more brilliant moves. That was very surprising. And my first experience with Joel's work with the Seldon Crisis was listening to the Beta Darrell, Katie Darrell the episodes. And
I also really hope we get to Arcady, because she was I was about the same age as she was when I first read those stories. So because she's the one character I really identified with, simply because she was the one character that was offered to me. And also, whenever people say Asimov doesn't have women, I said like, okay, Beta Darrell, Arkady Darrell, and of course, Susan Calvin. I loved Susan Calvin as a teen. A lot of people say like, oh, she's so cold and so distant, but I liked Susan Calvin. I was a teenage girl. I was a teenage nerdy, geeky girl who thought all the other girls were stupid because they were into boys and fashions and always loved Dirty Dancing, which is actually a pretty good movie, but the wrong people liked it at the time. I'm also good with all of those stupid girls from the time. They all turned out to nom. But I was like, okay, I don't want anything to do. And there was Susan Calvin, and she didn't have any. She didn't need boys. She didn't need makeup. She had those wonderful pale eyes. Eyes like liquid.
Thin lips.
Actually went to my chemistry teacher and asked him what does liquid nitrogen look like, and she said like it's white. I said like white, just white. Just told him, but there's a character which has eyes like that. But anyway, Susan Calvin was sort of she did important stuff. She built robots. She had no use for any of this romance entanglement stuff. So yeah, I loved her for that simply. I know a lot of people are like, oh, we don't like her, but also she was cleverer than all the guys and sort of. That's another thing I really want a proper. When they did the I, Robot movie with Will Smith, they had the woman from Blue Bloods who plays the daughter from Blue Bloods, Tom Selleck's daughter. I like the actress. But she's absolutely not Susan Calvin. She's got brown eyes. They should have taken Meg Foster's too old now, but she has these extremely pale eyes, Meg Foster. She would have made it wonderful. She was actually the sort of person I envisioned because I'd seen her in the 1987 Masters of the Universe movie. So I was a woman with a Meg Foster and her very pale eyes. So she's what I imagined Susan Calvin would look like. But yeah, I hope we get Susan Calvin and Powell and Donovan doing robots troubleshooting one day.
My fantasy is that, and this is, I'm realizing this isn't going to happen, but what I always hoped was that when this series came out, that it would become super popular, and there'd be the full 8 seasons. And then there'd be spin-offs and reboots. And one of the reboots would be the real Foundation story, exactly as Asimov wrote it. And that it would be, and then there'd be like the robot stories and all sorts of things, like a whole Asimov universe.
I think what they were hoping for was that it would be the next Game of Thrones, because a lot of the fantasy and science fiction shows that have been greenlit was supposed to be the next, everything from Westworld to The Witcher to Wheel of course, the Wheel of Time people are also complaining that their stories. I've never read I've tried to read it. It's not for me. For me, but Wheel of Time. They complain that their story is inaccurate, but it's a lot more accurate than Foundation is. At least the characters are still the same people. There's some changes made to powers and so on. Like I said, I haven't read. And The Witcher, I've only read the first short story collection, and I think that's a pretty good adaptation, even though it's not a full thing. But all of these things got greenlit because Game of Thrones was we only got Game of Thrones because the Lord of the Rings movies were a success. But the mainstream audience that watched Game of Thrones, they're not watching Foundation. They're not watching Wheel of Time either. They've moved on and watched Succession or The Bear or Bridgerton or whatever. All of these, they watch other shows. I think you can't bet on the mainstream. I call them the mainstream audience now because you can't bet on these people. Their tastes are fickle. It's a miracle that they latched onto Game of Thrones and that we got what we got. But it's not the next. And with Foundation, I always wonder. I've also written this on blog. Who's this for? It's obviously not for the Asimov fans. They throw us the bones with all the names and so on. It's those names are fan service. It's a bit like, for example, the new Masters of the Universe cartoons. If there's suddenly a character who was an obscure toy 40 years ago, and he shows up in a small scene, and literally, if it's shown at San Diego Comic-Con, the whole Hall H is screaming the name of this character. It's that sort of thing as if they mention Limmerponiard or Asparg or something. That's fan service for us. But they're not making the show for us, which is fine. There's not a lot of us. But they also actively pissed off a lot of. I mean, Paul Krugman, who's a huge Foundation. Because there may not be a lot of Foundation fans, but a lot of Foundation fans have gone on to become really interesting and also important people. people. So yeah, they're actively pissing off a lot of Foundation fans, or just very much frustrating us. The mainstream audience, yeah, they watched Game of Thrones, but they're not watching Foundation. They're watching Succession or Bridgerton or whatever, which is fine. Let them watch that. And then there's the general genre geek audience, and a lot of them actually hated just the idea of adapting Foundation because, Asimov was a white guy and he was a sexual harasser, which is always like, yes, of course he was, but it's not as if Asimov's roving hands are going to reach out of the TV screen to grab you, and it's so white and so stale, and even though so you can't. Those people might enjoy actually the show, but they're not going to watch it because there's this weird idea that any kind of science fiction before 2000 or whatever the cutoff is, it's all racist, sexist, whatever. It's wrong. It's a shitty idea, and I've been fighting it for years now. But you can't. These people would have been happier if you, for example, adapted the Imperial Red trilogy by Anne Leckie, which I would have loved to watch. Or if they'd done the N.K. Jemisin Broken Earth trilogy, another one I would have loved to watch if they did it. But they are not at the Asimov level yet. Those we'll get in 50 years when the people have moved on and say like, oh, we don't want this old-fashioned early 21st century stuff anymore.
Yeah, I agree with all that. By the way, Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel laureate in economics.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I pronounced his name this German way. Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Would be Krugman here.
That's right. I think he watched like 15-20 minutes of the first episode, and he said, "This is horrible. I'm not going to watch it."
This episode was actually pretty good and also fairly accurate.
That's right.
That was what's really, if he bailed then, I wonder how he would have survived this endless pilgrimage thing on the spiral, which was like, please.
Exactly. And he said basically that his work in economics, he said and wrote this, was inspired by Asimov's psychohistory. That's why he became a Nobel laureate.
I never won a Nobel Prize. I only won a Hugo, but that's pretty cool. But I studied sociology because I also wanted to do psychohistory. It was like, okay, this is cool. And when I considered what to study, I mean, it was a minor subject. My major was English, but minors were sociology and cultural studies. And I actually did sociology because I thought, okay, the Foundation people are sociologists. That's something cool. That's something I want to do. So, and it has inspired a lot of people. Paul Krugman and Elon Musk. Okay, we hate what he did to Twitter, but he was inspired. Newt Gingrich, not exactly a good person either, but a very terrible person inspired by Foundation was Osama bin Laden. He's an Asimov fan.
Really?
Yeah,
wow, I never heard of that.
I think the English is the Arab translation of Foundation. So he named his terrorist group. Yeah, he also made the mistake of thinking that he's a great man of history, which he was not. But I mean, all sorts of people, including some very offbeat people, are huge fans of this. I think regarding Apple, Steve Jobs was a big fan. Of course, he's dead now. And so a lot of very important people and people who went on were inspired by these books to do, to do things, not always good. Some of them did terrible things like Osama bin Laden. Others went on to win Nobel Prizes like Paul Krugman. So he's which is also why those books are they've been so impactful for generations. And I think something which hewed a little closer to the original stories would still have worked and still could have had the same inspirational impact on audiences today if you can persuade them to watch it.
Yeah. Listen, I want to see more of the series, and I'll watch the third, fourth, however many seasons there are. And this might sound like slightly spiteful. If the series is not renewed, David Goyer has no one other than himself to blame, because he started with, again, what many people regard, and it won the Hugo Award for the best all-time, science fiction trilogy.
Yeah, I love that one, by the way, because they only they have a regular best series Hugo now, but they only did this one of Hugo because they wanted to honor Lord of the Rings, which had just come out in paperback in the US. And everybody loved it, but it was no longer Hugo eligible because it had been missed when it came out in hardcover in the UK. No one had in the US almost no one had read it. And so they introduced this all times Hugo and then Asimov wins it. I love Lord of the Rings, but I love Foundation more. So for saying this is so hilarious. That Asimov took this prize because everybody said, okay, Lord of the Rings is great, Basum is great, Landsman is great. What was it for? The fifth one I think was Heinlein's Future History. It's all great, but we love Foundation more. So this is so wonderful and so typical also.
Absolutely.
Well,
I just want to say I agree with your analysis too. I mean, I think Lord of the Rings is a wonderful trilogy. There are a lot of wonderful, even magnificent science fiction stories out there. But
also people, some of them have never been filmed. We had a Basum film, it wasn't good. We have never had a Landsman film. And they could, we've had a Green Lantern film, but that one was shit as well. And no one has ever done Heinlein's. I've done very little Heinlein as movies for some reason.
I want to pick up on a point you just made, Paul. I don't want to blame Goyer if this fails, because who you should blame is Apple. Because
it's not Goyer.
Because really, this goes back to the main point I wanted to make about how, when Goyer pitched this to Apple, they said it can't be an anthology. It can't be an anthology where we don't have recurring characters season to season, as in the books. So that was a non-starter. There was no way he could do Foundation as written by Asimov, right? He had to make significant changes in the plot to get the pitch approved, right? So it's really Apple's requirements to bring in millions of potential viewers by having recurring
TV
characters.
Executives being stupid. That's a common thing.
Exactly.
I mean,
and so considering that constraint, I think he made the best of what he could do with the material. The one thing I would change, as if I was producing this show from the start, is something very simple. I would not say at the beginning in the beautiful introduction thing, I would not say based on the novels by Isaac Asimov. I would say inspired by, because that's a very slight.
That's probably a legal thing. That they have to say this, just as they have to list Robin Asimov in the credits.
Yeah, well, Robin Asimov, let me say about Robin Asimov. I don't know her from Adam. I did meet Isaac Asimov. I talked to him. I have the postcard. I don't know Robin Asimov from Eve. So, but I am surprised that she allows her name to be put on.
Yeah, I think she gets a lot of money for that, and that's good for her. Good for her. I want her to have money. Have money, because her dad wrote a lot of stuff which made me very happy. But I mean, Asimov has terrible luck with adaptations. Fantastic Voyage. Let's not talk about that one, even though it's at least half very regular. But the book is also not very good. The I, Robot movie and the Bicentennial Man movies both are not very good.
I agree.
Foundation, at least this is well made. Also I think honestly Robin Asimov says things like, she's laughing all the way to the bank is what I think, and that's good for her because I want her to have money and so on. It's just I wish that there would have been a better so it's a little bit more like her dad's work.
And
let me say one quick thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and then I'll I want to hear what you have to say. Here's why I disagree with what you just said about not blaming David Goyer. He could have had his cake and eaten it if he had made the innovation of the Cleonic clones, and that would have been a departure from Asimov, and those would have been actors and actresses, and even let's throw Demerzel in there. They could have continued throughout it. I've had the least problem with that because, first of all, I think it's great science fiction. And as far as Demerzel is concerned, I mean, the truth of the matter is, in the novels that followed the trilogy, he didn't play such a great role anyway. He had an important role, but not so. So that would have been a good way that David Goyer could have satisfied what Apple wanted without basically deforming the the whole rest of the foundation.
Yeah, but we
to
don't know
me,
what
to me, let me-
the TV executive interference
Let-
is, because
let-
we know. Sorry, but a lot of media. For example, the reason we never got until the X-Men movie came out in, I think, 1999, we never got superhero team movies. So we had superhero team because they said, like, oh, but it's way too confusing to have more than one superhero, and now we have the Marvel universe, simply because someone said, okay. And in this case, it was Marvel themselves, because who were in the position to do it, to say, like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to tell these interconnected. Now suddenly everybody wants to do it. And also, of course, anthology shows. We have anthology shows. We have these American Horror Story and whatever they're called, American Crime Stories. There's a lot of these. Or we have Black Mirror. So yes, audiences are a lot smarter, and they accept a lot of things, and things are a lot smarter than TV executives often think, or movie executives. And this is not the creatives, this is not the directors, the writers. They know that audiences are smart. It's the people up there who, it's people like this, okay, he has nothing to do with Foundation, but he's obviously David Zaslav, the Warner Bros. CEO, who's one of the most hated people in Hollywood, at the moment. This person has zero imagination, and apparently hasn't even watched his own movies, and it's people like those who also apparently. And we don't know what happened behind the scenes unless what Goya and Friedman tell us. And Goya, Friedman, and his writing stuff. Those, like I said, those are good people. Jane Espenson, Eric Carras, they're good writers, they're good screenwriters, and they've obviously read the stories, and yeah.
I want to get back to Paul's comment on the deformation of the plot. Okay. What this raises in my mind is, you said he could have had his cake and eaten it too, by just having the Cleonic dynasty, the clone dynasty, and those be recurring characters that Apple would be happy with. And also Demersal, right? Because she's a recurring
Harry Seldon,
character.
of course.
And well, wait, I wasn't going to get that. That's where I'm going. If you just had the clone dynasty, and you just had Demersal as the robot, and those are the continuing characters, that would not deform the plot significantly that much. I mean, you could still have pretty much the same story. You're right. But Hari Seldon is the big deformation of the plot. The fact that Hari Seldon has agency as an AI, continuing beyond his life, makes huge ramifications in the plot that it definitely deform the story. And my thinking on that is, I'm glad he did it. To me, and I think Apple was very glad he did it, because Jared Harris is the big draw. And that means Jared Harris can be in season after season after season, right?
I mean, he would have been there anyway, but only as a holographic guest appearance.
Right, and that wouldn't be the same
a lot
at
more
all.
to do. That he's an AI now.
Yeah. So to me, that's where David Goyer made something better than the original cake by coming up with something that could be something entirely new. It makes it a new story. And this is my main point. This is not the same story. This is not the same story told by Asimov. This is a brand new story inspired by it. And this is one of the ways that you can take a core story and create something completely new out of it by adding something that didn't exist at the time it was written. There was no such concept anyone had of an AI that would live forever and continue. Well, maybe, I don't know. Cora,
Demersal Daniel kind of lives forever.
But
this was in the 1980s expansions. He was not supposed to be as immortal as he turned out to be in the early 50s.
I mean, the idea of a human being uploaded and becoming digitized, and living beyond their time, and continuing, basically living potentially forever as a digital creation, right, from what they were. So to me, that's a something where he's updating it to something that is that takes current technology into account. That's something that's like people are thinking about now, and making a story out of it that you couldn't do otherwise. And so I'm glad that that Apple put those constraints on him, because it made him come up with this kind of idea. And to
I'm
me,
pretty
that's what
sure
makes
Asimov would have been
that's
fine
what
with
makes the
that.
story. Here's my point. Yeah, here's my point, that the Foundation TV show we're seeing, I think, is a wonderful show, and I'm really glad it exists. And I look forward to seeing it year after year, if it does. But going back to my fantasy, if you think about things like Frankenstein and Dracula, right? Those were like great, like old stories that were created, or maybe not ancient old, but 100-year-old stories, and uh, they were turned into schlock, basically. Because they were, it could entertain the masses to make them the way they were, as the Frankenstein movies and the Dracula movies and all that
And there
stuff.
have been some
And
good ones.
and it created a buzz around that stuff. It made it like real, like people are like crazy about vampires, people are crazy about monster movies and all that stuff. But you get a zeitgeist, building on this, and at some point you're like, it becomes big enough that you can have somebody go back and say, I'm going to read the original book, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and I'm going to produce a movie and call it Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? You probably couldn't do that from the start. That wouldn't be the way to start the movement of making something like, big, for generations. But it's something you can afford to do later, to go back and do. And so that's where my fantasy says, make this like huge, make this the Asimov cinematic universe, so that somebody somewhere along the line, 10, 20 years from now, is inspired to pick up the original trilogy and read it and say, I'm going to do this story, and I'm going to call it Isaac Asimov's Foundation, right?
Yeah,
That could still happen.
it could still happen. I appreciate that, and I'll say, I mentioned Dune. There was a Dune movie made in the early 1980s. I actually thought it was
1984.
right. Thank you. I thought it was pretty good, but I agree with most people that the current, two-part Dune movie is a lot better, and it's a lot.
There was also a TV series in the middle somewhere, which was I think it had a very young James McAvoy, but otherwise it was pretty forgettable.
Yeah. But so I think that's a fair point that Joel is making. But let's conclude this, and let me just throw this question out to the two of you, because I think this also gets to the heart of it. I agree with you, by the way, Joel, about that. It's the Harry Seldon that deforms it, and for better or worse, I think for worse. But let's go even one step deeper than that. Could you tell me, each of you, where you think the psychohistory is in the television series? Because I actually don't see it there. In other words, another thing about the original trilogy was it was unbelievable. I just mentioned it earlier. The Bel-Riosi converging, with his fleet on Terminus, and he's suddenly defeated. That was Asimov's brilliant philosophic invention. That's what got Paul Krugman so excited about the story and made him become a Nobel laureate economist. So I honestly, I'm not even being sarcastic. I see a few glimmers of psychohistory in the television series, but that's about it. And I would be interested if either of you see it more clearly than I do. And because of that alone, forget about the fact that Bel-Riosi is a different character. Forget about the fact even that Harry Seldon is a different character. If only this show for me had the vibrance of Asimov's psychohistory, I would feel better about it.
Okay, I can take a stab at that. I think you have a point in the first season. I think that the way they introduced the concepts of psychohistory, I mean, in the first episode, they brought it out strongly as like what it's very much like in the books. But as the season went on, they kind of seemed to drop it. It just didn't seem to be that important. And then, at the end of Hari steps out of the vault and blah, 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 it says, I predicted all this generally, right? But I can see that argument about the first season. But and I even felt like when I watched the first season, that was where some of that tension came from, was like, did he even read the books? Is Goyer even like a fan of the books? To not really get psychohistory to make it the main point. And this season, I felt like there was a lot more about psychohistory in it. There was a lot more of Hari Seldon describing how the individual doesn't matter, and that what matters is the plan, the long range movement of forces that he has predicted through his science, and he describes it. You don't see it. You don't see. I grant that you don't see the collapse of Belrios's attempts to destroy Foundation, which is a great, vivid demonstration of the power of psychohistory in books. You don't see that in the show, and I think that's a failing. That's a partial failing of it. I think that's partly a product of the plot being so completely different that it's very hard to recreate that just in that same with powerful way that it was done in the books in the general. But one thing I think I've learned from the first season and the second season is to be patient, and I'm really hoping that patience is rewarded by a third and a fourth season at least. And if we get a third and a fourth season, then he has time to have psychohistory become even more important. And it still can be. And I think it's too early to render a judgment on that. I think out of all the Asimovian concepts in this, I think psychohistory has been brought out a lot, at least in speaking about it and in describing it. The great man theory versus the bottom up theory was kind of dropped and not paid much attention to, and I think that's a major failing. It really needs to be. And that'll be. I hope to see that as a major part of Isaac Asimov's Foundation in 10 or 20 years. But the psychohistory, I think, for an action TV show, it's done as well as it could in making that important. I think it's too early to say he's failed in that. And I do believe the one thing that I'm really convinced on more than anything before than I was last time is that Goyer cares about Asimov's books, that he's a book fan. Because that's one thing that came out over and over again doing all the transcriptions for the official podcast where he's on every one, is his love for the books really emerged from that, like it didn't in season one. Almost like he was kind of like ashamed to admit how much of an Asimov geek he was in season one. And in season two, that really came out. Maybe not as much for if you're just watching the show, and that's important. It's the show should have everything. It's not enough to say, yeah, I'm a huge fan of the books, but yeah, I didn't bother to put any of that in the show. I think he's trying to get those things into the show, but it's hard. It's hard to get them in a way that works with the deformed plot and all the action you need to satisfy viewers these days, right? Hopefully.
All right.
But I'm on the edge. I'm on the fence on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, psychohistory is explained usually by Harry Seldon several times through the series, beginning with a trial scene in the very first episode. So they clearly know how to, and he clearly explains everything like individuals don't matter, it's the greater trends and the anti-great men of history series thing. It comes up again and again. There's just a problem, so they obviously know how it works. There's just a problem. The show or the writers also tend to forget it. For example, making both Gale and Salva Hardin in the books is a very clever person, but he, because in the book Salva is male, or let's just say they are not special in any way. Right? If Salva hadn't been the person who'd been the mayor of Terminus at the time of the first crisis, someone else would have done it. That's very clear. Just as Hobo Mallow isn't special, or Limmer Ponyard, they're just the right person in the right place at the right time. But if they hadn't been there, someone else would have been. And they're not. None of these people are super special. And Gale Dornick is basically just a sounding board. Gale is someone who introduces us to the concept. And I'm not sure why they are keeping Gale around for so long, especially since like they've got a great cast, but he's one of the weaker links in the cast. He's kind of she's whiny. She's frequently like I actually like Salva more, even though Salva is not very much like the person we know from the books. But Gale is the weak. But these people are not super special. None of them are. They're just at the right. The funniest thing was when they got Hobo Mallow in the story, and the vault literally had this graffiti written on it, "Get Hobo Mallow," and there's no way Harry Seldon could have predicted Hobo Mallow's existence. Of course, it almost seems that they backtrack, like, "Oh crap, we forgot how this works. Let's give some explanation for this." When Salva contacts Harry in the vault, and says like, "Oh, someone said the name Hobo Mallow. Who is that?" And he was like, "Oh, that's interesting. Let's see if this helps." It literally seems as if they had to retcon this because they forgot. So this is a problem. They know how psychohistory works, and of course, also the funniest thing is that it's how the Cleons are basically deflated, all of them, because that's the other antithesis of the great man theory of history. Cleon, for the first, thought he was such a great man that he would have to be great forever. The other Cleons are his puppets and Demerzel's puppets and don't really know it. And the Cleon who wants to change everything is basically the defective one who's not going to change and who basically gets kicked out of an airlock in a very satisfying scene. So yeah, it's so this isn't it's the story kind of so it's torn. They know how psychohistory works, but then they have to bring in like, "Oh, but Gale is super, super special and Salva is super special." And also they're related, even though and they don't have to be super special. I mean, at least they don't tell us Hobo Mallow is super special. And they don't have to be super special. They just have to be smart. They're all smart, intelligent people, but it's always very clear that if it hadn't been them, it would have been someone else. And again, for me, this is also part of what made the great person theory of history, although it usually was a man, but there were women always, great women too. The great person theory of history was already mostly on its way out by the time I was in high school, but Asimov deflated it really a lot earlier by saying it's the greater trends and the larger populations that matter a lot more than a single great man or great woman. I mean, we see this with which actually happened 34 years ago today. Today, the Berlin Wall fell.
Today.
Berlin Wall. It was today, yes. Today is the anniversary. It was also my grandmother's 70th birthday. And she got the best present ever. She was actually from what was then East Germany and had come to the West sometime in the 1950s. And that was her 70th birthday, and she got the best present ever. She was from near Dresden. And this is it. It really happened today. And it's an interesting example because a lot of the time they hear like, "Oh, but Ronald Reagan ended." So yes, Ronald Reagan did play a part, as did Gorbachev. If someone else had been in charge, and Ronald Reagan actually played probably the least part. He was mostly a militant. Sorry, but he was.
Classic.
But Gorbachev was really important. If there hadn't been Gorbachev, it would have gone. But the greater trends were there. The people were getting restless, and they were getting, and also there was a lot more contact from beginning in the 70s between East and West via school exchanges, cultural exchanges, city partnerships. There was more contact. The people could get to know each other, realize, oh, we're not really that different, but the people in the West are having better lives. So there was a lot of, and also the slow economic collapse, there was a lot of greater trends. And if it would have happened sooner or later, maybe not then, maybe not the way it did. But also again about the wall, how it opens. This is something, it's because it was really a chain of weird, a chain of unusual events. There was this press conference by Günther Schabowski, and I saw it live on TV. I was 16 years old. I saw it live on TV, and he said like, oh, they can. And the idea was just that people could leave the East Germany if they wanted to. They're not going to shoot you, and we're going to make it easier for you. But they did not want to open the borders for everybody and easily. And then some journalists said like, oh yes, and you can leave. And then some journalists said like, asking questions to the men. And Schabowski hadn't really looked at his notes, and he said, I think it's immediate. He hadn't checked his notes. And I said, like, I remember seeing this on TV and saying to my parents, like, did this guy just say what I think he said? And of course, lots of people saw it in East and West Germany. And they said, okay, immediate. So they started going. And in Berlin, it was, of course, first because Berlin literally had the wall in the middle. Some people only had to go maybe 100. So the people just went to the border checkpoints in Berlin and said, like, oh, but they said on TV, we can cross. And the border guards were standing there and were quite... didn't know what to do, and they called the superiors and said like, okay, what are we going to do? And the superior said, no, cross, and we don't know anything of any press conference. And this went on, and there were more and more people arriving. And then one guy at the border cross point in Bornholmer Straße, where there's a memorial, and this guy also later got a medal for it, which he deserved. There was one border guard. Could have been an asshole, but he wasn't. And he actually said then he called his superiors and went for several hours, and they said, okay, I've got two choices now. Either I can shoot all those people and order fire open, or I can open the bloody gate. I don't want to shoot these people, I'm going to open the bloody gate. And everybody was waiting for someone to make a decision. And once one border checkpoint was open, they opened all of them. It literally took only a few hours. So yes, it would have happened anyway, sooner or later. But also it was the right person in the right place at the right time. It was this border guard whose name, unfortunately, I've forgotten. I would have to look it up. It was Günther Schabowski being too stupid to read his notes. Yeah. And it was a border guard who just said, okay, I'm not going to shoot people. It might have happened that some border guard who was an asshole would have been on the place and said like, okay, I am going to shoot. But this guy just said, no, I'm not going to shoot. I'm going to open the... So yeah, it's a mix of these things. And Asim lived to see it happen.
Reminds me a little bit of Petrov, the guy who didn't start the nuclear war. But can I get back to one thing Cora said in Foundation? Back to Foundation for a moment. The engraving of Get Hober Mallow. That you said something about how it seemed almost like a retcon when they explained how that happened. Well, this is a really interesting point to me, and this came out from those transcriptions of the podcast and listening to Goyer talking about how he came up with these things. Goyer didn't know how he was going to solve that. He wrote that scene without knowing how he was going to explain it. And this is really interesting to me because this is a lot like Asimov in that Asimov played fast and loose with like how he was writing the plot when he wrote a story. He wrote from the seat of his pants, right? He would write things, and somewhere in his unconscious, he'd be like kind of putting together connections, and eventually he'd say, here's how I can explain how that happened, right? He was brilliant. He was a genius at that, right? Yeah, I don't know if he knew about how Magnifico was going to be revealed, when he started the scene on the beach. Maybe he did explicitly, but I'm not convinced that he didn't work out in his unconscious while he was actually writing it. And I think Goyer's trying to do something like that. He says very explicitly that he likes to write towards a solution. he'll kind of come up with a place he wants to go to without knowing how he's going to get there, and then write toward it. And this was a prime example. He said it wasn't until he was approaching the deadline of getting those parts written about how they were going to explain that it came to him while he was walking his dog or something, that he could have that the prime radiant be the vehicle that conveyed the existence of the importance of Hober Mallow back to Selden in the vault. And when it struck him that he could do that and transmit that information in that way, that's when they wrote that scene to account for how Selden knew that Hober Mallow was going to be important, and that they had to get him. And this is just one of those ways that I think Goyer is not Asimov, but he's writing like he wants to be Asimov. He's writing in an Asimovian way, but not at the level of genius that Asimov had, right? So there are flaws, and if you look at Asimov's work, there are flaws in that as well. He's not a perfect writer. There are lots of things.
The early Foundation stories, particularly, he was of course very, very young when he wrote it, but there's a lot of stuff which doesn't quite work in the early stories.
Right, and he doesn't connect the dots all the time. Sometimes he just leaves things to, like
in the Merchant Princess, where he misses a fatal clue, where he fails to, where Hober Mallow said, "Oh, but this guy wasn't a real priest, and I can tell this," but he never actually told us why this guy who was lynched. I mean, they did actually have the lynched priest, except that Hober Mallow was nowhere near when that happened.
Yeah.
This is one clear example where Asimov apparently forgot to put in the clues he should have put in. But he writes very much like a mystery writer.
A couple of final things, because we don't want this to go on forever.
We don't?
Well, we do, but I don't think all listeners would appreciate it. We could keep on talking until the third season comes out. But let me.
I think I have enough to talk about.
It's so good. Let me just say, though, a couple of concluding things. One is, I've said also many times, and I think I attached this or a link to it in the show notes to our conversation after the first season. I wrote this piece about the Foundation trilogy in the late 1970s, sent it to Isaac Asimov, and that's how I got to know him. He replied with a postcard, which addresses exactly what we're talking about, what you in particular, have been talking about, Joel. I basically, in this story that I wrote, this factual story that I wrote about the Foundation trilogy, Asimov's response to it was, well, thank you for making me sound so smart, but I had no idea that it was going to turn out this way when I was writing it. I was just writing it as I went along. And that immediately struck me. And I don't know to what extent I was influenced by that, or I would have been that way anyway. But just about everything I've ever written, I have no idea how it's going to end. I don't even know what's going to be on the second page, sometimes not even the next paragraph. I just make it up literally as I go along. And of course, as the story develops, I begin to have some ideas about where it's going. I might go back and change something. So yes, I think that is the way Asimov wrote. I don't know what to say about David Goyer, and I hate to keep sounding like such a critic of his. I wish him well, but apropos of what Cora was saying about Gorbachev and the Berlin Wall, and by the way, happy anniversary and also happy birthday to your grandmother.
Yes, she would have been 114 today if she'd lived, but she's been dead for almost 30 years now.
All right.
But
Well,
she did see the wall come down. She did get to visit her old hometown again because she never went back after she left. She didn't get along with the regime there. So she did get to visit her hometown again. She did get to go to she liked see operas and operettas and theater. She did get to the beautiful Semper Opera in Dresden, Opera House in Dresden. So yes, she got to see it come. She got to see it come down. She got to visit her old home again, even if she could have, but it probably wouldn't have been that great if she'd lived longer because she had dementia towards the end.
all right. Well, I'm glad at least you got to see that. But I wanted to mention there's another science fiction series on Apple TV Plus, and actually it is going into a new season tomorrow. It's called For All Mankind. You've probably heard about it. It's an alternate history, but beginning to verge into a future thing based on, it's always what is the difference in history that creates the alternate history. The Russians, the Soviets, wind up beating us to the moon in the late 1960s by just a couple of months. And that, changes everything, including.
That would have easily happened. I mean, they were very, very close.
Very close.
Very close indeed.
That's right. And one of the differences is that Gorbachev is not basically overthrown, at the end of the 1980s. And, Boris Yeltsin, becomes president of Russia and the Soviet Union falls apart, which of course has led to the deplorable situation in our world today where you have.
I think it probably would have been better if Gorbachev had been in, because had remained in, because then we got Yeltsin, who was pretty terrible, and Yeltsin paved the way for Putin, who turned out to be even worse.
Exactly. That's exactly
so again, the Soviet Union was probably going to collapse, because I actually visited when it was still the Soviet Union. I was at one of the first school exchanges with the Soviet Union as a teenager. Was just before the wall came down. I think it was literally we went to Latvia, which is now Latvia. Then it was, of course, the Soviet Republic of Latvia. And we went there when I was and it was maybe a month or two before the wall came down. Very shortly before, and even there you could see the unrest, because the Latvians are not culturally also quite different from, they're not Russians are even very close, and you could feel the unrest, and that they did not want to be there. So I was not surprised that three Baltic republics declared themselves independent. Also wasn't that surprised by the various Central Asiatic republics, which are also different. I was a little bit surprised by Belarus and Ukraine, because especially Belarus is basically culturally quite similar. Especially Belarus is quite similar, and Ukraine is, of course, culturally similar but different enough, and to have a lot of bad blood and bad history between them. But yeah, that's something that could have. But again, I think it probably would have happened sooner or later, just in some way, maybe in a worse, bloodier way, but. I mean, at least the other countries the Baltics are fine. Ukraine was actually was doing quite well until the invasion. Some of the Central Asiatic republics are doing quite well, so others not. But yeah.
Right, I agree with you. It could have been in a better way, and with any luck in that.
I mean, it was good enough the way it collapsed. The way the
right.
Eastern Bloc collapsed was simply amazing, because it collapsed almost without. The only bloodshed was in Romania. There was no bloodshed except in Romania, and we were quite. I actually know a lot of Romanian people now, and I like them. It's a great country, but I was really angry at them at the time, because we managed this without the bloodshed, and you idiots have to ruin it by shooting.
It was pretty bloody. Anyway, though, For All Mankind has Gorbachev and the Soviet Union surviving into the 90s. So if you're interested in that alternate history, I highly recommend that. By the way, Ronald D. Moore is the person who is behind that. He of course, is responsible for the revamped Battlestar Galactica, which was
Outlander.
And Outlander, that's right.
Yeah.
So maybe David Goyer should get in touch with Ronald D. Moore, and Moore can help Goyer out at least a little bit. In any case, today is here in New York. It's Thursday, November 9th. It's 4 p.m. And I think we'll conclude this now But I certainly hope, and I know that Joel and Cora do, but I, as you know, probably even a worse critic of it than Cora, want to just say again, I'll eagerly watch the third season of Foundation. And if there is a third season, and I hope there is.
They are in production, apparently. They were in
Okay.
production and had had to break off production because of the SAG-AFTRA strike.
All right.
So they were actually beyond, so they were in production, and I hope they will continue to produce.
Yeah. And we will do our part by coming on after the end of the third season, whatever that is, and we'll see where we all stand at our.
Okay.
All right.
We'll make David Goyer, Josh Friedman, and everybody else feel bad again. Or maybe, okay, well, actually, we also praised quite a few of the people, especially the actors, so we are not making them feel bad.
That's right. You're completely right. The acting is superb. And even David Goyer, I'm sorry for being so critical. You did do an amazing job, at least getting this off the ground. I just hope you do it a little better and fulfill at least Joel's vision a little bit yourself in the subsequent season.
No, to be clear, I do not expect David Goyer to do Isaac Asimov's Foundation.
I
I
know.
expect
Someone
somebody
else,
completely
maybe.
different that we have never heard of is going to
I
do
know.
it. Because it's going to be 10 or 20 years.
No,
But
you
we
also
didn't
said-
expect we'd get another that the Dune would get another shot after the David Lynch movie of 1984. And of course, Dune was only adapted because Star Wars had been a success. It opened the floodgates for a lot of also interesting science fiction movies we might otherwise not have had.
That's right.
Don't think we would have had Blade Runner or Alien or any of those without Star Wars. And
That's right. And
also we probably would never have had Star Trek again without Star Wars, because the Star Trek movie was only greenlit after Star Wars.
That's completely right. Good point.
Yeah,
All
and like Lucas got as much criticism for Star Wars as you're giving Goyer for this.
Yeah, but,
amongst a lot of
Lucas has
people.
heard it all,
Not for
but
me, but
he's
he didn't
I
have to
think most of
adapt
us
it.
wouldn't be here without Lucas. Okay, Paul maybe, but I wouldn't know there was other science fiction influences before Star Wars, but Star Wars was so much permeating everything in the late 70s, early 80s that especially if you were young, you were growing up in the shadow of Star Wars. Now, older people like my parents say it never really pinged on their radar, but it was, if you were a kid, everything was also a lot of the kids' shows were influenced by Star Wars. Star Wars was actually took me a long time to actually get to see Star Wars, simply because we had no VCR, didn't have one until I think it was even the early 90s, because my parents didn't like paying for entertainment. That was like, TV is free, we don't need satellite TV or video VCRs or anything. So it was quite difficult to actually get to see it, but it was always there in the background because the toys were everywhere and the posters and the movies and it was everywhere, and just the actual thing was not so. Yeah, without Star Wars we wouldn't, and I think also without, of course, and Foundation is of course also a big influence on Star Wars. I mean, Trantor is Coruscant or vice versa. That's right. And it's also probably why seeing Trantor didn't really have the impact I thought it would have, because I'd seen Coruscant on in the various Star Wars TV shows and movies before, because Trantor. So it wasn't the impact like, oh my God, it's Trantor, because we'd seen Coruscant before, but still Trantor was the original city planet. And it was a place where I wanted to move as a kid. I was like, oh God, I want to live there. No, I still want to visit that library. That's right. Yeah, the library. I don't even need Trantor, but give me the library. Yeah, before he was killed by Arcady. All right, folks. Thanks so much. We'll see you back here in a year or two, our viewers and listeners. Probably 2, because they had to interrupt production. That's true. Thank you, Cora Buhlert and Joe McKinnon. I'm Paul Levinson, for those of you who are listening and you don't see the names here on the screen. Take care and enjoy what comes along in the Foundation television series. There'll certainly be something in there that's good.